Well, good morning, everybody. So I wanted to start you off today by just looking at some satellite data. And here's the quick plan for the remainder of what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the severe weather threat we've got coming over the next couple of days. We're going to talk a lot about how this pattern has got things established and why I think it's causing some issues with the predictability beyond a couple of weeks. I want to talk to you about the heat that's coming into the eastern part of the United States, which we've been alluding to for a while now. Kind of look at its duration and just try to understand what the impact could be. And at the very end of this, I want to stretch it out, give another look at those ocean temperatures, talk about what it could mean going into the rest of summer, and I'll finish with some important international things. But first, I just got to tell you, I got to give Matt some grief. I really appreciate him filling in for me yesterday, but I was not on vacation. I've been traveling all throughout Canada this week, giving several talks and meeting with several groups, and yesterday my flight out of Saskatoon, I had to be at the airport before 6 a.m., and as a result, I just could not get a forecast done early enough for you in order to make that flight. So I appreciate Matt stepping in, but man, I wasn't on vacation. I will take a vacation later this month and through the week of the 4th of July. So we will have a few more times where Matt and Andrew get to fill in for me. I appreciate them very much. Okay, all that out of the way, take a look at yesterday. We were watching several pieces here, right? We had storm systems that were rolling through the Canadian Prairie. There's lows here. And we had fronts that had been draped. There were the boundaries. Look at this boundary right in through here on which these huge storms formed on the Iowa-Nebraska border last night. A lot of the haze we see late in the day, some of this is just the remnants of wildfire smoke that has come out of parts of Mexico, just in the middle and upper atmosphere here. And I want to show you just the depth of the convection in parts of Florida. We'll take a closer look at the total rainfall there in a few moments. But some of these storms were pretty nasty yesterday. I did notice late in the animation there was a fire here that you can see the smoke trail from in parts of Wyoming. I always just try to look for those kind of features as I'm watching these kind of animations. Through the overnight hours, looking at some infrared data into the early morning this morning as the sun was rising. We're almost at our maximum angle here with respect to getting to the solstice. And so we're about to max out on daylight hours here very soon, and that angle will start to bend its way back the other direction. But ongoing convection this morning coming out of South Dakota, also right here through parts of lower Michigan, getting into Wisconsin and Illinois. And you can continue to see the depth of the convection that is this kind of weak tropical-like low that just spun up over Florida yesterday and is moving out. Okay, just looking back at the hail, I just got to show you some of these maps. This is 3 days of hail. Of course, we talked about these earlier in the week. Kind of our newest storms were more here in the upper Midwest. And some of the hail streaks in Minnesota, getting back into parts of western Iowa, South Dakota, Nebraska. This is just, again, reports of very, very large hail that rolled through this area. And yesterday's severe storm reports added up another 192. We did have a couple of tornadoes in Manitoba. Unfortunately, as I was in Winnipeg, I didn't have a car, so I couldn't drive over and see them. But again, some impressive convection here in the upper Midwest, getting into southern Canada following this current system that was rolling through. Total rainfall out of this. Just take a look at some of these totals here. And I want to bring up an important point about this. As we transition into this development of a pretty sizable East Coast ridge. I mean, it's going to sit somewhere between the Southeast, the Appalachian Mountains, the Ohio River Valley. It is important to note that the atmosphere for most of the U.S., especially east of the Rocky Mountains, of course, west of the Rockies, it's a different story, right? Climate zone's entirely different. The setup in May and June is entirely different. But for most of the country, we have not had any trouble kind of uncorking the atmosphere, providing the moisture, and getting storms to fire. And I'm just going to bring that up because as you start to see the forecast of some of the heat that's going to be coming into this area, just remember we still also have the juice with this. And we've got the setup to make the atmosphere pop late in the day. In other words, we've not extracted a critical layer of moisture at any point in the atmosphere to really just dry the whole thing out and prevent convection. So that's just a point I want to make here. But as we take a look over the last 3 days down in the southeast, it is important to note that we now have parts of Florida that were extensively in drought for the past almost like 80 days. It just picked up well over a foot of rainfall. And the flooding, I'm sure you've seen it in the news over what's happened down here, has just been, this is a major disaster, and we still have more precipitation coming in that area. Again, the storms early this morning, we can see them down here, still in parts of Florida, but off the southeast coast. We're watching the clusters of storms that are coming through parts of Wisconsin and also along the Mississippi here, and the storms that have rolled across parts of South Dakota early today as well. So just playing a radar animation, let me just pause this here and kind of get a good look at where things are this morning at the very tail end of this animation. We're just trying to figure out if the models were well initialized and where the storms were so we can understand if they got a better idea on where they're going to go. And what's happening today is that there's going to be this stalled out frontal boundary in this area. Now the flow, as you can see it in the low levels, is coming like this and like this. And what's going to happen is right along this front, right in through here, we're going to get storms to pop later today. The reason why I bring this up is because we always look for the direction the wind is kind of attacking the front. And overall, our flow is more parallel to the front, meaning that we will likely get a line of storms coming through this area, the potential for very, very heavy rainfall, and but not the risk of tornadoes. It doesn't mean that we can't have them. It's just the primary threat is not from them. We continue to see the stronger winds through the Caribbean that's turning over Cuba and continues to pull in this direction. We can see that weaker circulation in the lower levels of the atmosphere that we need to keep an eye on. And then next region we're going to be watching carefully is going to be the Bay of Campeche as we get another system that could possibly spin up here. We'll take a look at the National Hurricane Center's outlook in a few moments. The western part of the U.S. getting into the Pacific is going to be a major discussion late. I'm going to get back to that here in just a few minutes as we try to just examine where this pattern is kind of got its origins and what that means in terms of trying to predict the duration of heat that's coming into parts of the country. But first, let's take a look at the National Hurricane Center's 7-day outlook. They've given a 20% chance that this could spin up to become a tropical depression. But it's going to be later this weekend. We're going to watch this region down here where right now we've given this a 40% chance of developing. We need to see where the moisture from this goes. Does it get into Mexico, which will be critical for the drought in Mexico, or does it press farther to the north a bit into the Texas coast, which, as we're all aware, has had just a tremendous amount of flooding in the southeastern part of Texas this spring. Okay, severe weather today. Storm Prediction Center's outlined that area along that boundary we talked about. So here it is coming out of Kansas to Missouri, Illinois, getting into parts of Iowa and stretching later into northern Indiana and in Michigan, lower Michigan. Going forward into tomorrow, we're going to see that front sag a bit farther to the south. We're going to keep an eye on parts of the northeast. And then on the back side of it here in Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska. As we get into the day on the 15th, we do have another system that's kind of cranking up across the northern tier of the U.S. And we'll see how later in the weekend, even on Monday, we're going to watch out for the risk of some stronger storms coming through this area yet again. But as it stands, let's go take a look at this morning's high-res NAM. And remember a moment ago we looked at the radar data. I call that a pretty good initialization, right? We have the storms here going, storms in this area, and what just left Florida's coast. So on a bigger picture view of the U.S., the middle of the day today, getting into this afternoon and this evening, that will be the frontal boundary on which we're going to watch convection here, the biggest. There'll be larger storms back coming out of Wyoming, possibly some cells in parts of Colorado, and all of that's kind of feeding around. See the ridge that's in here, kind of feeding around that, linking up with this frontal boundary. Still more storms in Florida as well, so we're going to add more rain here, which is we can't take any more into the system. It's going to continue to produce a lot of flooding. As we just play it on through this evening, I'll be flying home tonight, so I'm kind of pumped I might be able to get in and see some of these storms from the air. But as we watch these storms roll through parts of Illinois and Indiana, we're going to get into the early morning hours and it kind of breaks apart. But you'll watch again tomorrow afternoon and evening, storms coming through parts of the northeast. The tail end of that, again, initiating that severe convection here tomorrow night, on Friday night. And we'll watch this going through the weekend. And again, more rain coming through this area in terms of storm development. So I did want to zoom in and just show you the kind of the north central United States more closely, just to kind of get a sense of the timing of where that line might come through, both in time and space here. So this is 6 p.m. tonight. And we're going to watch, I just want to keep a close eye right in through here and then watch the storms on the back side link up. But again, I think this is more of a linear feature rather than individual supercells. And this is just one simulation through 7 o'clock tonight. It's the high-res NAM. So this will not have the exact timing, but it will give us a sense of what's going on. And going to be some rough storms coming through this area tonight. That's why they've got the enhanced risk out. Just playing it through the overnight hours into early Friday morning. Getting out there again to Friday evening. We're just going to watch. I know it's on the corner of your image here, but this is where we're going to keep an eye on Friday evening for the risk of those larger storms to come out into early Saturday morning. And that'll just play you through about midday on Saturday. All right, from here, I do want to point out that on Monday, we are watching parts, let's get back on that, parts of the upper Midwest and the Red River Valley of the North for strong to severe storms. And where that's coming from, I think is best represented in this height anomaly map. Now, I'll be honest, I think our entire story is being written here, and that's why we look at these maps. This is the flow of the atmosphere. And let me show you what we've got going on. All right, cutoff low to the south, ridge right now, that's the one that's kind of peeling those storms off here. The flow, though, it's mostly in Canada. That's where our jet stream is living right now. Okay, this is later today, getting into Friday. That's the shortwave that initiates the next round of storms that you saw coming out of Colorado. But look at the big shortwave that's coming through the Pacific Northwest, knocking those temperatures down. This is why on Sunday, getting into Monday, we're going to keep an eye on a lead wave that goes through the Canadian prairie and the wave that kicks around the backside here. This will be Monday night coming through the the Northwest, initiating severe weather. And what's important about this is we're out there around midweek next week is the size and position of this ridge and where it's going to go. Now you know that we've not had the ability to plant and leave a ridge over the eastern part of the United States, be it the southeast, the northeast, anywhere. It's just not been able to stay there because of the momentum in the flow and the lack of support from like a big Bermuda high just to push over in this area. So I'm going to watch to see where this ridge goes because it is going to bring in several days of excessive heat into this area, this whole region. But as we play it forward, this is the 19th, 20th, 21st. As that ridge really opens, we almost touch 600 decameters in the height of the ridge. That's very, very high. We noticed that by the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, it begins to kind of reshape itself in the artificial intelligence. And this is still here. So this contrast of ocean temperatures resulting in this thermal wind that has just been so strong. Now, when I say thermal wind, don't be thinking hot wind. That just tells you that there is a gradient throughout the low levels of the atmosphere. There's warmth to the south, cold to the north, and that drives the wind. So it's called the thermal wind relationship. That is what just continues to push through the United States. And what we've got here is that by the 22nd, that ridge that was really tightly wound up here over the east, it begins to broaden out, and some of the models are kind of just shoving it farther to the south and opening the central U.S. open to these waves that come through. And so if you're looking for a block where the pattern just gets stuck and doesn't move, the amplitude and position of that ridge is not set. It's a temporary, under 10-day feature that's going to be here. But for 10 days, we're going to be talking about a lot of heat in this area. But it's not just the artificial intelligence that brings a change through and opens the pattern up and keeps it going. The ensembles are doing the same thing. And as a result, we just have to be careful with seeing a pattern change and then kind of thinking it's going to get stuck there and never change again. So that's it. This is how this pattern is going to roll through. Now, overall, for the next 14 days, as that ridge becomes established, you see the models forecasting a pretty large area through. In fact, I should have drawn that a little bit bigger. A large area through here that's looking drier. And I want to be careful with this because, again, I've stressed this over the last several weeks. It's drier, and in the ensemble, what it's just being consistent with is the presence of the ridge. What the ensemble doesn't do, any of them, the GFS, the European, any of them, they cannot capture convection. And so what I care about is there anything that is majorly just taking the moisture out of the atmosphere? Because when it gets this hot, you'll reach something called the convective temperature. And the convective temperature is where you just got hot enough that the atmosphere is able to produce its own storms based off heat without even a boundary. And we're going to get days where we hit our convective temperatures or get close to them, or there's enough in the atmosphere of a weak boundary just to nudge to that direction, and it'll storm. It will storm in parts of this region, but it's going to be like a full-on summer pattern. It's isolated convection that feeds off of its own outflow into the most juicy air, and some places are going to get huge storms that roll through. Why we see the drier overall is because the atmosphere does not have the flow during that time to just support the broader lift in the atmosphere. All of that is here along the U.S.-Canada border and in the upper Midwest where the flow is going well, and that's why the European ensemble sees it. The tropics are juiced. Look at parts of Mexico. I mean, we're talking about extensive drought now getting a lot of precipitation here, which is going to be critical for many things like the southwestern monsoon later on this year. So a lot about this next 10-day time period is going to tell us about what summer's capable of doing. So from there, let's get into some of the models. This is the AIFS forecast for the next 7 days. And I'm going to tell you that I think the AIFS will struggle this summer because of its resolution and because of its inability, how well will it be able to capture convection based off of its training data set? I really want to know. We're going to have to figure this out. But take note, still the wetter conditions here, the surge of moisture that's coming toward Texas. Notice how it has more along the Gulf Coast than some of the other models do. Upper Midwest, Canadian Prairie, quite wet and very stormy. That's where the flow is. Next, this would be the NBM, National Blend of Models. And just as we pointed out about a week ago, one of the weaknesses of, I think, the NBM and the WPC is that when you see these maps, they really represent the front-loaded time period of the week in terms of precip, not necessarily what could come later. But that's why we also incorporate the use of the European model and also the GFS. And the European and the GFS out of the next 7 days, while synoptically they're calling for the same pattern, they are not putting precipitation into the same regions. And I thought I had this. Yeah, I have it up right here. This is the difference just in the next 7 days. When you look at these colors represent where the GFS is wetter than the European by a certain inch amount, and this is the European's wetter. And if you look, so much of Montana getting into the upper Midwest, major differences, whereas, that's where the European is wetter, but the GFS here, and here is significantly wetter than the European. And so we always look at these models and try to compare them, but the overall reason we're doing this and trying to understand how the precipitation pattern may look different than these models is just to remember that we sit right here in terms of the last, 42 days for 43 days, I guess, of precipitation in terms of ranks. So the area that I'm thinking a lot about is we know that the models are wet here, but there's been a spot in Illinois and Indiana, parts of the Ohio River Valley, southern Michigan, that have been drier. So these storms coming through are kind of critical to the crop. But this will be the area that we take on a lot of the heat. Now that heat will also come on top of parts of the Mid-South, which has had a tremendous amount of rainfall lately, which is going to go over drier. Remember, there will be convection, but the drier pattern with temperatures easily every day getting to the mid to upper 90s. And so we are looking at this, trying to assess, will the atmosphere pop? And just want to take note of some of the soil moisture issues. There's been some kind of a decrease recently in soil moisture in parts of the Ohio Valley, getting up into the Great Lakes Basin, also over here in the Carolinas, Virginia, the Mid-Atlantic. And we've kind of have our continual dialogue about Kansas and Oklahoma. Again, even though there's been storms that have rolled through here, the evaporation rates have been taking a lot of that moisture out of the atmosphere after the storms. So we're just keeping an eye on these areas and trying to figure out if we can understand any sort of a flash drought scenario that could be setting back up. By the way, I did write a letter of support earlier this week to NASA. There was a new grant that was going out by the people that make this, where they're trying to do short-term prediction with this particular modeling suite of flash drought scenarios. And we gave them our full support at Nutrien as a corporate partner to develop that. So hopefully they win that grant and they're able to do that work. It'd be amazing to complement this with a forecast, not just looking at history here. So I'm pretty excited about that. Okay, we've looked at that. Let's get here. Models as we go forward. This is going to compare the artificial intelligence to the GFS to the European. And overall, as you look, for the most part, the highest performer has been the AIFS on matching the pattern. We've really kind of seen that. The GFS has been, at some point about 5 percentage points lower in the last 30 days. That's important to note. But the models right now are struggling with how long to leave that southeastern ridge, and that's why we've dropped off again here. But we're going to look at them anyway. Soon I will be able to compare the AIFS to this as well, and other models. We might get up 4 panels on this. I don't know. We'll just play around with it as I release some of this new forecasting map stuff I've been working on. But as we play through Friday into Saturday, models are pretty keen on picking up on the storms that are rolling through here as the front clears. And we watch a deeper low move into the Pacific Northwest. Now, if you just take note of the Pacific Northwest, watch Montana here. As we get out there into this upcoming weekend and early next week, notice how much more moisture is in Montana and the upper Midwest than is in what's in the GFS, and that's one of the differences. At the same time, the GFS has a different placement on the surge of moisture coming out of this potential tropical development in the Bay of Campeche compared to the European model as well. But here we are on Monday, and again, we're going to watch the upper Midwest for the risk of those strong to severe storms on Monday night. Notice the GFS didn't quite pick up on it, but the SPC is saying watch this area. And they're probably using a lot of the guidance here from the European on this. So again, that's into your weekend, early next week. Now at this point, by next Wednesday, we have kind of the full extent of this ridge event that's going to be sitting in this area. And ultimately, it's going to be the size of this ridge which determines how the flow pushes either moisture into Mexico or into the coast of Texas. Just take note that the models are quite different on where the heaviest rains are going to be from this. This is again by next Wednesday afternoon. But this particular corridor is going to continue to stay very active with wet weather, which is what we saw in the model summary maps a few moments ago. All right, as we get out there to Thursday into Friday, again, we're watching the heat. But you notice that the GFS trying to toss out some semblance of convection in the Ohio Valley. And there'll be frontal boundaries here. And if they make storms, guess where those storms will cascade into? They'll cascade across that area that's got that heat and the humidity and could possibly blow up storms in this region, which are not even being resolved yet by the models. So just need to consider that even though you saw the drier forecast, the atmosphere is capable of making those bigger storms. But we have to look at the ensemble and just weigh it against the whole message. And over the next 10 days, the European ensemble picks out kind of its driest areas over here in Virginia, North Carolina, here in parts of the Mid-South, so southern Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and the northern parts of Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and then into parts of Texas and Oklahoma. Now, the Southwest we expect. I mean, this is kind of what's expected this time of year. But on the wetter side of this, I bet we got a new model running here. Oh, good. It's going to be this region of the upper Midwest and the northern plains of Canadian Prairie that likely sees the wettest conditions. And then as we finish the tropical surge here and watch the next one, this will be the wild card area to see where the heaviest rains are going to come from that after we get into this weekend. All right, so from here, let's just go ahead and have a look at the week 2 forecasts. This will be the thing I'm going to have to figure out and try to assess. I still think the momentum that is coming from the gradient in temperatures in the North Pacific is what drives a lot of activity along the U.S.-Canada border going forward. And while there will be ridging that will happen, I don't think it's the type of massive blocking ridging that we talk about getting stuck for 6 to 8 weeks, just completely changing the trajectory of where these forecasts are going. Because you can see in the CPC versus the European versus the GFS that it's attempting to keep momentum and activity high across the United States and Canada. And the momentum I'm talking about is this. So what is this map? The colors are not temperature. It's zonal wind, and this is at the jet stream level. So this is compared to historical average. Because of the contrast of the warm water here and the cool conditions to the north, the jet stream has just accelerated out in a zonal fashion, west to east in this area. We've had a contribution to the south of flow, and this is just what's kept the flow going across the United States so much. Now, to make this a little bit more familiar, I'll just give you a northern hemisphere projection, and now let's look at troughs and ridges. So I'm talking about flow coming over this ridge, dipping down over this trough, over that ridge, diving in through here. And we've not had a Bermuda high. I mean, since May, even before that, no strong Bermuda high. So when I'm looking for a reason to say that this big area of high pressure that's going to dominate our next 10 days is going to just stay there, and we're going to get some feedback that just keeps it in the loop, I want to say, is there anything upstream to force it out, or is there anything downstream to support it? And I just don't see it. So that means don't expect for the heat to come on and just never change again until like October. We're going to have interludes of storms, convective, clusters of storms that just roll through this pattern. And at the same time, we're going to be able to get, I think, a break. I think there'll be frontal boundaries that sweep through as well. But it's going to get hot, and I just want you to know that. This is what the ridge looks like by the time we get out there to the 16th. I mean, this is the ridge we're talking about. And is that a blocked pattern? I don't think it is. I think we've got too much flow in order to keep this around for a long time. But as it stands, this is what the CPC put out yesterday. From the 20th to the 26th, they're kind of keeping an eye on the risk of a moderate risk of excessive heat in a few areas here, stretching from the Missouri and Ohio and Mississippi valleys over toward the northeast. They're also keeping an eye in the west as well. So I'm going to show you these temperatures. Let's pick it up with the National Digital Forecast Database highs for today. Absolute scorcher in the plains into the western Corn Belt. We're still quite hot throughout the Great Basin. Cooler along the coast. We've got that June gloom going on here along the coast. We're cooler in southern Florida because of cloud cover. This is Thursday getting into Friday. Going into our weekend, that's Saturday. There's that trough that's coming in. This is the one that's going to set us up with severe weather on a Monday here in the upper Midwest. That's getting into Sunday, a lot of heat from Colorado all the way over to Pennsylvania. A lot of upper 80s, 90s, and triple digit as farther you get to the west. This is what things look like on Monday. That's going to be a very hot one throughout much of the Great Lakes Basin, Midwest, but very sharp contrast here. This is where we're going to watch for that severe storm risk right here. And as we play out a bit farther into Tuesday and Wednesday, the model appears to be bringing a front through, but we just have to question how quickly do we knock back these temperatures and how quickly do they go back to where they were. So just so you know, the maximum number of GDDs that can be calculated using a base of 50 and a max of 86 in a 7-day time period is 252. So we see here that with the heat that's coming in, there's going to be a lot of heat poured onto this crop. And the thing I'm concerned about is, as I've mentioned, there will be storms that are able to blow up in this. And this is the time of year where storms, when they blow up in these hot, humid environments, they tend to line out quickly and they produce wind damage. With the heat that's coming onto the crop in this area, it's going to be growing very, very quickly as we're here in mid to late June with our vegetative state. This is when the cell structure gets very long, especially in corn. And what I just don't like is the risk of those stronger storms that could come through and possibly impact this new crop as it grows with all of this heat. There's a bit of a model discrepancy day 5 through 10. Today's European model continues just to pound this area with temperatures 10 to 15 degrees above average. The GFS looks something like this. Not quite as aggressive when you look at the ensemble versus an operational model. When you go out longer with the GFS, day 10 through 15, we get this. It's actually returned back to some more persistent ridging in the west with near normal temperatures trying to come back through this section of the country. That would be more indicative of an open pattern that's moving and fluctuating, not getting stuck. But the Europeans got a little different opinion. That's day 5 through 10 from the European ensemble, and this is day 10 through 15. Overall, just kind of keeping the much above average temperatures as we finish the month of June and get into July. And again, our narrative all along, and I haven't had overwhelming evidence to overturn this yet, is that we do stay pretty hot across much of the United States, even into the southern Canadian prairie going into summer. I just think it's going to be hot, and for a lot of folks, it's going to be quite stormy in this area especially. So if we build that narrative out, I want to show you something. We look at this in every forecast video, the European weeklies. This is their forecast for days 4 through 11. So that would be, the 16th through the 23rd. Now, I always like to just take you out there and we're like, okay, let's just watch this week by week and watch where the ridges are and see where the pattern's going. And I want to make an important point because we get out here to mid to late July and like, wow, massive ridge over the Four Corners, and I would just say this would lead to ridge riding storms, and that's going to open up a big area here that's going to be very stormy and hot. But I want to make a point. Can we come back to that day 4 through 11? What did this look like when it was forecast? That time period, June 16th to the 23rd, what was it forecast like, back at the end of May? It looked like that. So this model has this default, and it's built in to kind of go to a climatological average. And that's what summer looks like. Summer flow, on average, looks like this, with the jet stream retreating north. So I bring that up because you're going to see all of these models. If I give you a 30-day forecast, not from this, but from the newest run, from now to mid-July. In fact, let's just take it out there. June 20th to July 20th. There's just a lot of heat in this because we're seeing an early retreat of the jet stream farther to the north. But when we look at these precipitation patterns, our natural thought process is to take anything that's brown and say that it's going to be very dry, and anything that's on these green to blues is going to be just soaking wet. And the model doesn't have this right. It just doesn't. It struggles with summer. These models are so much better in winter when the forcing is strong. So we just need to be careful with it, because just to give you another example, look how the end of June finishes in the CFS V2 and July starts. A lot of storms in the Canadian Prairie, upper Midwest, down around Texas into the southeast, a little drier in the Ohio Valley, drier in the Western Plains. But then you get to the 4th of July to the 10th of July, and the CFS V2 opens up that quarter that was dry to storms. So what I am looking for is I'm trying to understand, is there anything that's going to cut off the momentum that's been gained here? It may ebb and flow, but is anything going to cut that momentum off? Because that will ultimately determine what happens in the central U.S., what happens in the West, if we can get a bridge to live over the southeast. It's not just that. We watched the PMM region, the Pacific Meridional mode. This was really cool. This has started to warm up a bit. And our Atlantic Meridional mode, which is quite warm here, we'll take a look at the cooler water emerging. This is a part of a trade wind pattern here, giving upwelling by getting the flow to do this here and this here. And we are expecting a surge in our La Nina once we get, past the next 10 to 15 days. I think it's going to do the same thing. It's going to come and go. And I just think so much of this pattern is being determined by this. And so until I have some sort of evidence to overturn the momentum gain from that, I can't see the pattern getting fully blocked up for weeks on end across the United States. What I do see, though, is where the strongest winds are. They're going to be somewhere in here. And that's why I'm making the case that the jet stream is likely going to live in the same spot. And that's why I think most of the U.S. goes hot and stays hot. It's going to be a hot and stormy summer for a lot of us this particular summer if you are east of the Rocky Mountains. Okay, going from there, I do want to point out the PMM made a pretty big recovery in May. It was way down here, and that's the cooler water going away off the coast of California. We're actually back almost to historical normals. If we look at another factor, the PDO, we've taken a lot of look at this lately, right? The PDO, it's very negative right now. And we just have to be careful to understand what a negative PDO means, because it typically means that we do have hotter conditions throughout much of the U.S. But this is not, I just want to be clear, this isn't textbook PDO. If you said, well, what's textbook? That would be where we would just anchor a ton of heat here, and all of this would be much colder. And we'd have a component of La Nina helping. This has got its own flavor, or right into this area, we have our strongest wind and the greatest momentum, and that's what's driving, I think, the pattern across North America in the near term. So while I think it'll be hot, I'm not even going to show you the precipitation patterns for July and August with the PDO because it's going to be misleading. I think it'll be misleading. So we'll keep building on these ideas. I'll just keep sharing them so that we can kind of figure this out. But I do think it's going to be a hotter summer for much of us across the lower 48 because of things happening in the Pacific Ocean and the Bermuda highs lack of dominance. From here, I'm going to give you a quick international update. A lot of heat going into China right now. There's a Mayu front to the south of it. We'll talk about that in a few seconds. A lot of heat in Western Russia. You see the heat down in South America as well. Western Australia is quite hot right now. And just for comparison, we've looked closely at what's happening here. These are kind of the same magnitude, these heat waves happening in these areas. So on the precipitation side of it, we do see the atmosphere trying to produce storms in this area. And what I want to know is, given the timing of these crops, this is not something I understand well. Would these storms, if they do manifest themselves with that heat, be a good or a bad thing for the crop in that area? Also take note, there's a lot of heat in the Ganges River Valley, and then there's dryness in that region too. But the Mayu front will likely be causing flooding that will get here and a bit farther north of the Yangtze, which could be a major issue as well. We have a lot of heavy rain coming back to southern Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Argentina in the forecast. But as they're harvesting the safrinha crop, the dry season's fully on in major parts of Brazil. So I just want to give you a quick international update as we finish this up. As you can see, a lot of the ideas are kind of transitory and they're in flux, but we'll just keep watching it. We'll talk more about it tomorrow, and I'll pick up again next week. So have a good one, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.